Welcome to my shop.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited. It looks absolutely magical in there. I just want to just crawl through the TV and be in that space. It looks wonderful.
Well, we'll have you in the space in person in the fall, but for now, here's our Zoom interview. We're going to talk about this gorgeous book right here. Shawna on the front.
Mm-hmm. That's right. I loved that dress.
Yeah, you write about the dress so beautifully.
Thank you. Thank you.
So this book is brilliant.
Thank you.
I love it so much. And my first thought when I finished it was that I couldn't wait for the sequel. Is there going to be one? I guess the story that would begin in Virginia Beach and then where you and Dave like get together and kind of where you end up where you are now.
Yeah, I think there will be. I'm already talking a little bit about it with my agent, and we sort of talked about how my mom would be sort of the North Star of the next book, and it would definitely include the love story of my husband and I, and our getting back together, and it would start in Virginia Beach, that's for sure. So yeah, I hope so. I mean, there's nothing better really than the ability to just sit and write a book. So that's my dream. I hope that that's how it works out, but you don't ever know, so fingers crossed.
Yeah. So I'm going to sort of dive into my hardest question right away. Sexual abuse is pervasive in religious settings and communities. You write about your own experiences with such clear vision. In my opinion, the willingness to talk about such things as you do in this book is the best weapon we have in the fight against these types of abuses. Totally applaud you. I'm all in. It's great.
Thank you.
How did you find the courage to speak up? And what advice do you have for others who are struggling to be honest about these types of experiences?
Yeah, well, I think that it's taken me, I'm 48, and it's taken me all this time to be able to, and it still scared me to death, like on a daily basis. My kids will tell you they were present for most of the creation of the book, and I have anxiety anyway, and so it was just ratcheted up 100% during this process. But it's also strange when you write a book like a memoir, or I think really any book, it feels like it's not real, and then all of a sudden it's real. And so I thought I was having anxiety beforehand, and then when it started to become obvious that it was actually going to be a public thing, that was a whole other level of processing the sort of risk of that, personal risk. And I think that, I don't really know. I never really felt anything like bravery. It was mostly fear, but I also felt very much like I imagined not writing the book, and that was even scarier for me, if that makes sense. So it was really like weighing the two fears, the fears of telling and the fear of holding myself within myself forever, and not really ever being honest about my experiences. So it when I weighed those two decisions, it seemed like the better one was to tell the truth. But it's still scary. I still struggle with talking about it, and I'm a Gen Xer, so I come from an era, way before the Me Too movement, where when I was in high school, people were still discussing whether or not things were rape, for example, and they always were, you know, um, there should never have been any question about the various imaginary scenarios, that people came up with. But I was from an era that, so much of the conversation centered around the woman and who she was and her character, and there was always a sort of dissection of that, and I feel like there still is, and I know that fully, and I knew that when I wrote the book. So I mean, that is the scary part, and I have encountered it a little, um, the disbelievers, but I think it's, as I said, it's better than the alternative, which would have been to not say and to keep that secret and to feel like I hadn't done my part, for women who I love with all my heart. So
That comes through. That comes
I
through.
hope so. I hope so. Yeah. I hope that answers your question.
It really does. It does. And I appreciate how vulnerable you are you know, with these answers and just being honest about things like anxiety. I mean, that's so important. We all have anxiety, right? And then you have a
Yeah.
book coming out that like reveals all this stuff and like, yeah, you feel anxious. The thing is though, Shawna, you're a genius. Like this book is
Oh
incredible.
gosh. Thank
This is not a
you.
minor accomplishment. This is a major accomplishment. And it's not like the writing is incredible, the themes are incredible, the way you like deal with your dad and that story. And I guess I mean my next question is including the letters your father sent home from Vietnam was just brilliant. And it was a great way to humanize him and it helped me like have a window into that moment that I've never had before. And I've seen plenty of things about Vietnam and I've read about and this was just completely different. How did those letters find their way into this book? Was that something you planned to include from the
That's
start? Came up along the way?
it's yeah, that's one of the very best stories of this particular memoir, was because they came to me kind of by accident, and I had already been kind of in a pickle about how to write about my dad's experiences in Vietnam, because I'm not a soldier and I've never been a soldier, and though I don't necessarily adhere entirely to the idea of writing only what you know, because I think there are lots of ways of knowing experiences. Um, but I also think that, when it comes to like the specifics of soldiering and the equipment and the, uniforms, and I was just having to do an exorbitant amount of research that I didn't really even trust entirely. And it wasn't really what I was trying to get at anyway, which was the stories that he had told me about some of his more difficult experiences there, but they were obviously they were secondhand. And so I heard them as a girl, and then as a young woman, without knowledge of types of guns, because, I never really got into the whole gun thing, even though I grew up in a culture where people were into it. I shot them, but it wasn't something I felt hyper familiar with and comfortable, like acting like an expert about. So anyway, I had really agonized over how to write about it authentically. And then I received a sort of box full of old things that belonged to my grandmother, Betty, who is a main character in the book. And it was just, like old Christmas bows that had been used 20 times that she saved, and, things like that I have and I treasure. But in the bottom of the box were those letters, from my father to her, because he had to write to her because my grandpa couldn't read. So she would read the letters to my grandpa. And it took me about a year to put them in order, because what I included in the book was about half of what I had. We had to, cut them down for the sake of time. But yeah, it felt like this most wonderful gift from my grandma Betty, who has always been the family archivist. And I wrote my dad and asked for permission to use the letters, and he told me that I could, which, was also a really amazing moment. So yeah, I feel like when I read them and I put them in order, I couldn't believe just the arc of them, how he started as a young man who had never been outside Eastern Kentucky with all of the biases and prejudices that you would have in that scenario. And then after he had been there, how it changed him. I was just so blown away by the story and the letters, and thrilled to include them.
Yeah. So you still talk to your parents. That part is clear at the start of the book,
Yeah.
or you visiting them in 2017. And as I read,
Well, my mom died when I was writing the book, so it's just my dad now. But yeah, we still talk.
yeah, I mean, this is a book about family love, right? And how it's complicated and sometimes brutal, and you forgive them, you forgive your parents, and you love them, and you're still, in their lives in a really big way. And I feel like that's, turning vulnerability into strength. And like, another kind of open-ended question, but how did you do that? Like, how does a person get to that point?
Yeah, I when you sent me this question, I puzzled about it for a long time. I thought about it, um, and tried to think of an answer that I could really, uh, you know, fully give. I think part of that is that it's just like my personality is such that whether it's conditioning or just the way I am, I don't know, but it's a lot easier for me to forgive other people than it is for me to forgive myself about things. Like I don't really have trouble wanting to move on and experience better things with people, which I think is a lot of what forgiving is like being excited about and willing to have future positive experiences, hopefully positive, better experiences. And I want that, with almost everybody that I know, and so it's just not difficult for me I would just rather be in that space than to be in the space where I am dwelling on problems. It's true with my kids, it's true in my marriage. And I think maybe that came from my grandma Betty, who kind of taught me early on, like, not to dwell and how to move on, how to get past things without it's not about pretending they didn't happen or denying the reality of them. I mean, we all have pain in our lives, but I think it has more to do with like just the desire to move forward into a happier space, and I really like being happy. So I truly enjoy it. I think, a lot of people say they do, but don't really. And I really like being happy.
Me too.
Yeah.
I feel like that's how
And
we,
I'm not judging people who don't. It's okay, it's like whatever floats your boat on this, crazy ride of human life is fine, but for me, it's just the way I like to experience the world, kind of with wonder and joy. And so,
yeah.
yeah.
Reading kin shows me how close you are to the place you're from. So I wonder what brought you to Evansville, Indiana. It's a place we have in common. How is Evansville similar, and how is it different from where you grew up?
No one has ever asked me that question. And I love this question because usually when I'm talking, especially to people from the North, they think of Kentucky and Indiana as the same thing, entirely, like everything below the Mason-Dixon line is the South. And and they're such different places. I live about 6.5 hours from where I'm from, and the town that I grew up in, Seco, which is an acronym for Southeast Coal Company, had less than 100 people in it when I was living there. And of course, there's a nearby town that has almost 2,000 people. Um, and then, in Indiana, where I am now, it's a fairly metropolitan area. It's a factory town, a lot of urban sprawl. So, things like I grew up in a town with I think when I was there was one stoplight. Um, and, now I drive in the city. So it's a different kind of thing. I'm lucky that the place that I live is so rural, like it's in town, but it's still in the country. And so I feel very much like I'm, you know, isolated like I would be in the mountains in the way that I love to be. I think you love that too, right? Don't you live in the privacy of the mountains too. So But yeah, it was my husband that brought me here because his family has been here for a couple hundred years. And when we first got together, I was living in New Hampshire at the time, and so he moved up there to be with me, and then we ended up moving down to Indiana to be closer to family. So,
Where in
so
New Hampshire were you? I'm in New Hampshire.
yeah, I was in Concord. Well, not in Concord. Most of my stuff that I did was in Concord. Actually lived in Center Barnstead, right outside of Concord, like 25 minutes or something. So, yeah, I was there for 11 years. Um, and then we moved to Indiana, to Evansville, and it's like, I think anywhere that you live, there are things that are wonderful about it and things that are challenging about it. And truthfully, most of that has to do with you more than the place. So it's like your own, issues come up. My mom always used to say, it was the thing that I love that she said that whatever it was that you struggled with, that was what she was very religious. So she would say that was what God was going to give you to have to deal with. Like whatever your struggle was in life, he was going to make sure that you encountered it over and over and over again until you got over it. And even though my ideas about God are different from hers, I do kind of feel like that's true with life. So the things that I'm most frightened of, it seems, are the things that I'm given to face, again and again. And I've tried to think of those as lessons. And moving to Evansville was part of that for me because it is a factory town. I grew up in a dry county, and it's a bar town. So it's just so different in every possible way from what is familiar to me. But I've learned to love it, and I've raised my kids here. And it's a pretty nice place to be. You did yoga with Chris, right? It was,
Oh, yeah, yeah. When I was
yeah,
in Bloomington, we would drive down to Evansville for yoga teacher training.
yeah. Chris is wonderful.
He is.
She's a dream.
So many
Yeah,
wonderful people that I met through that who are in Evansville. And I guess at that
yeah,
point, everyone was just talking about the Whirlpool factory shutting down
yeah,
and
yeah.
that
I
kind of
remember that.
the situation a bit.
Yeah. So, I think that's like, we were talking about the differences, and I think really in some ways there are no differences. That's what I meant when I said when you have trouble in a place, it's kind of it's kind of telling you what you need to work on, I think. And so when I moved here, I had to figure out new ways of being, and I think it was good for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about poetry. Who are you reading? Are you excited about? What are you writing? Are you working on a manuscript? And if so, can I read it?
Well, I have written a few poems recently. Um, I haven't really thought about a manuscript of poems in a long time, but I have been exploring sort of the time surrounding my mom's death because a couple years have passed now, 3 actually, almost 3, and so I'm starting to write about that. And so far it feels like the only way I feel comfortable doing that is in poems. So yeah. So there's that. I'm reading Patricia Lockwood. I love her right now. I'm a little bit obsessed with her. Um, Both her poetry and her memoir, Priest Daddy, which is just, I can't believe I didn't read it before. Um, but yeah, so I love her. I've been reading Robert Geip. I don't know if you know him. The third book in his trilogy. He's not a poet. He writes fiction, and he does graphics in them. So
Oh,
they're this really cool blend of, um, you know, art forms. And he's also a theater guy, but he lives in Harlan, Kentucky, and he's written a trilogy. It was Trampoline, Weed Eater, and Pop are the three books, and Pop just came out. So I've been obsessed with that book, and I
spell
think I
his
might
last name.
review it.
I want to look it up.
What is it?
What's his last name?
Gipe, Gipe.
Got it. Nice. Well, I
Yeah,
will definitely look
it's
for it.
amazing. It really is amazing. I can't recommend it enough. My kids all love it. My husband loves it. It's just he's so funny, and it's such a true, authentic East Kentucky voice, and that's just rare. But they're so beautiful. Those voices are beautiful, you know. So when you get to hear them, they're really something.
Yeah, definitely. So you know it's really something. Your style. You're one of the oh, in the book you mentioned Hepburn style in the African Queen, which I have a book about right here. Have you ever
Oh
seen this
wow.
one?
I haven't. That looks amazing. That looks amazing.
There are these wonderful pictures in here. Like look at her in this outfit.
Oh, wow. Yeah. She was something.
You
My
remind me
heavens.
of her. You really
Oh,
do.
wow. Thank you. Thank you
Who else
for saying
inspires
that.
you style wise?
It's always old movie stars. I want to be contemporary, but I'm just not. And I love exploring fashion kind of in that direction. And um and also I think because most of what I wear is secondhand, it's just easier to put together styles when you include more decades. So I think that's a big part of why I sort of focus on old movie stars. And of course my favorites are probably Greer. I love Greer Garson. She was in a movie that I can't watch enough. It's called Random Harvest. It's the strangest story, but I just love that movie.
I haven't
I
seen it. What's Random Harvest about?
Well, it's a World War I veteran, Rodney Coleman, um, and uh, she plays some sort of singer, like stage performer. And he comes back from the war and has lost his memory because that was, a common theme in stories from that era. So he's amnesic and um, sort of stumbles out of when the war ends, the hospital lets its guards down. He's in a sanitarium, and the hospital lets its guard down, and he escapes. And she takes him under her wing, and they fall in love and build a life together. And then he gets hit by a car and loses his memory again. And I know it's the strangest story, but I love it. And so she ends up working as his secretary to be close to him, but she can't tell him who she is. I know it's so convoluted. The
That's
happiest of endings, and everything is beautiful, and it's all set in England in the country. And there are all it's really the aesthetic of the movie that I love the most, because she's she usually is a little more anglicized, but she's more Scotch in this movie. And so, yeah, I love anything Greer did. She was kind of amazing, snarky, spitfire of a woman. Yeah. And then,
nice.
of course, Liz and Marilyn, I can't get enough of them ever. So, but my grandma and I used to watch old movies, and I think that's where it came from, because this was when they were just there were before VCRs and DVD players. I feel like such an old person saying that sentence, but um, you know, we watched what was on TV, and at my grandma's house, she would always keep her eyes peeled for old movies. And they came and they went, and you didn't see them again. If you didn't catch the title, you didn't know what they were. But I just thought they were the most beautiful things. And anything that was filmed before 1970 just seemed absolutely gorgeous to me. So, yeah, love old movies and old movie stars.
So I have the privilege of knowing you. So when I was reading Kin, I heard your voice in my head. Is there a plan to do an audiobook? And if so, are you the one reading? I think you should be because your voice adds another layer to all of this, another texture.
I would like to have, but no, there is an audio book, but it was done by another woman, and I've gotten mixed reviews, mostly positive. People do like her voice, and I'm glad for that. At first, I was a little nervous when I heard a sample because I thought maybe it was a little, her accent was a little more like Georgia, Florida, and it didn't sound as Kentucky, but they asked her to, make adjustments. And I think that she must have done a really good job because a lot of people have written to tell me they like the audio book. So I would like to have done it. I like reading. Um, I think part of that is just having read to my kids for so many years. I feel really comfortable reading. Not so much speaking most of the time, but I'm comfortable reading.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you answered this a bit in your article about Loretta and Dolly, but my final question, and it's kind of a big one, is if you could change just one stereotype about Appalachia, what would it be?
I think it would probably be that um, that we're quaint people, or like uh, like sort of, I guess, naive. Um, the idea of a very simplistic inner life, I think,
Mm.
is pretty pervasive. And I encounter that a lot. Even myself as a writer in circles, sometimes the assumption is that I'm not going to have, you know, layers. Um, and that can be a real kick in the gut, when you're trying to have a conversation. And it becomes clear that that's not what people think. So it's, I think, you have, there's a movement, and I appreciate it. After the Coen brothers did their "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" film, suddenly people seemed interested in Appalachia as a culture and as an aesthetic, and I so appreciated that part of the movie. But I think one of the reasons that it was successful is because it humanized the characters and made them complicated, even though maybe the way they sound is confusing to people from the outside. And I really appreciated that, and would like to see more of that in writing about the mountains. Everyone who lives there isn't like an herbal wizard, or an old granny making quilts. There are Gen Xers there. There are millennials who live in Eastern Kentucky. There are punk bands in the county that I'm from. It's America, just like the rest of America. Just, you know, because of the geography, the people who live there face particular circumstances, but that's true everywhere. So, yeah, I think it would be that I would like people to understand that there are volumes inside Appalachians that need to be explored, interesting volumes.
Absolutely. I mean, I love that answer to that question because your book is doing that. That's exactly what your book is doing. That's exactly the
Thank
myth that your
you.
book is dispelling. And to read it and engage with it, there's no way you could possibly go back to thinking, those old tropes and those old things, and
Yeah.
that's so exciting.
Thank you. Thank you. I really wanted it to do that. I also wanted it to feel in parts very comforting. And, that was important to me because the women in my life offered me so much comfort. And I wanted the book itself to offer that to people who would read it. So,
It absolutely.
yeah, thank you.
and just joy and wonder and awe and beauty. I mean, it's shot through with light, you know. And I think there's all these kind of dark
Thank you.
places that you take it, but there's this glow to. I mean, it's so good. I've been recommending it to everyone.
Oh, thank you, Rena. Thank you. It's been wonderful hearing from people who are responding to it. That's the best part of this whole process, you know, definitely is hearing people, you know, they write me messages and tell me things. And it just means everything because it's like, well, that's why you do it, you know? I mean, at least a big part of why you do it. So I've loved that part.
Well, thank you. And
Thank you for talking to me.
bravo.